All right, welcome everybody to the Lakers Legacy Podcast, where Connect 4, how about can actually connect 4? Because that is also Luke Kennard's number. Though he will likely have to change it because Dalton Connect is somehow still on the Lakers. For some reason, Kennard was wearing number 3 at the start of the season. Then he changed it to 4. He'll probably have to change it back to 3. All that to say, welcome to the post-2026 NBA trade deadline, post-Lakers 2026 trade deadline. We got Luke Kennard, and we lost Gabe Vincent, dove emoji flying away. And somehow, we also got Tommy Alexander back? Whoa! I am your host, Jonathan Hernandez. Welcome to the Lakers. Welcome to the Lakers Legacy Podcast. Tommy, welcome back to the show since leaving it ceremoniously back in October. What a time to come back. I have a question for you, though, before you get started. So the Lakers and JJ Redick just lost 10 Gabe Vincents. But did they gain back 20 Luke Kennards, is the question.
I don't know where you're going with this, but yeah, I guess, yes.
Me neither. Anyways, Tommy, welcome back to the show. How does it feel being back in the podcasting saddle in your car?
Yeah, the same old saddle. It feels good. Happy to be back. I wish there was a little bit more to talk about, but I don't know. I guess we'll get into it.
Yeah, so we shall talk about the only thing to talk about, and that's Luke Kennard. Before we get into the Luke Kennard stuff, though, if I could please ask you guys to like this video, comment down below, please hit subscribe, consider becoming a member to the Lakers Legacy channel. So the Lakers, the trade deadline came and went. The Lakers only executed one deal, Gabe Vincent and their 2032 second round pick for Luke Kennard of the Atlanta Hawks. If you guys watched my clearance rack shooters videos 2 nights ago, you would already know that Luke Kennard was one of my targets, and somehow it ended up coming to pass. In Rob Pelinka's Lakers tenure as the GM, whenever he has had at least $10 million in expiring contracts to trade at the deadline, he has always made at least one deal, and that continued this year. Although, I gotta tell you, Tommy, I was sweating bullets there till that Kennard deal happened. The only time Rob didn't do that was in the 2021 post-championship season, but that made sense because he made his deal in the offseason for Dennis Schroeder, and I believe Schroeder was our only expiring that year. But in every other year, when he's had at least $10 million in expirings, he has made a deal and at least swapped out a different flyer. And what a flyer this is, Tommy, for Luke Kennard. So we will get into our macro thoughts on this trade deadline as a whole, because I think we can both, get out ahead of it and call it lukewarm. Oh, man. But before we get into how we feel about the entire deadline, let's first focus on Luke Kennard, because this trade in a vacuum literally... And look, I don't want to be mean about this. Like, Gabe Vincent, for all intents and purposes, has been a great locker room guy. He seems like a very smart and personable guy. It seems like he should be a head coach soon. But as it pertains to actual on-court basketball play, it's almost like, people have said this. It's almost like we saved JJ Redick from himself, because it's not only addition by subtraction, but Gabe Vincent was not only a non-rotation player, he was a non-rotation rotation player, because JJ Redick was actually playing him, which was even more detrimental than him just being, an empty, like a bench dude like Maxi Kleber. And so in this deal, getting rid of Gabe Vincent and getting back a guy in Luke Kennard, who is literally leading the NBA at current in three-point shooting percentage, shooting 49% from three. To me, again, we're just going to talk about the vacuum of this deal. The fact that it only cost a second-round pick, and he doesn't muck up our books because he's only making $11 million expiring, still only 29 years old, and we also gained back $500K in savings, pushing us further beneath the first apron, which means we might have the ability to sign 2 buyout guys at a certain point when it makes sense with the prorated veteran minimum. And we'll talk about buyout guys in the second half of this show. But just in the vacuum of Gabe Vincent and a second for Luke Kennard, I would give that like an A minus A, especially because I think we always talk about point of attack defense. We need defense, defense, defense. At a certain point, I was like, I don't know. We had like a whole month when Austin wasn't here when we had our best defenders out there and it still didn't seem to matter. And we actually needed more offense. And most of all, we needed shooting. Like, that's why I made that clearance rack shooters video, because I was like, wait, why is nobody talking about the fact that we are not a good 3-point shooting team? And before you give your thoughts on Luke Kennard, the Lakers this season, they are 22nd in 3-point shooting, shooting 34.9%. They are a below average 3-point shooting team. They are also a way below average 3-point shooting volume team. They are 23rd in 3-pointers made, averaging 11.9 threes. Now, when you dig into those stats even further, Tommy, you will know that Luka Doncic is our highest volume 3-point shooter. So is Austin Reeves, and then LeBron James. I don't like the fact that our best volume 3-point shooters are also the dudes with the ball in their hands, you know? Outside of Rui Hachimura, who's the only tertiary catch and shoot 3-point shooter, shooting 44% from 3, which is great, but it's at a lower volume of 1.8 threes, we need far better and far more consistent tertiary shooters who just catch and shoot and get the ball from these ball handlers. The fact that our best volume 3-point shooters are also our best playmakers is a huge problem, and it bears that out in all of the percentages. So here comes Luke Kennard. What are your thoughts on the deal, and what are your thoughts on Luke Kennard?
I think, generally my thoughts on the deal are positive. I mean, it's not like I'm like, oh, my outlook on the season has changed. But, when you and I have talked about this a lot, obviously, over the last couple of weeks offline, but I just wanted something. And I don't mean it in like the Twitter, like, oh, I just need a change. We have had like more than half a season of so many wasted roster spots, and certain of those wasted roster spots being used on actual rotation players, like you said, right? It's not like Gabe was just like Maxi, where it's like, okay, that's a waste of a roster spot, but whatever, you roll your eyes and move on. He was being played and he was terrible. I mean, like, there was not a justification for playing Gabe Vincent this season. And so that's like kind of like, the initial reaction to Kennard is like, okay, cool. So we're getting worse even defensively, but Gabe was such a non-factor offensively. And again, this is another thing we talked about so much, but like, he was such a non-factor offensively that he would have needed to be all NBA defense to justify playing a guard who shoots 30% from 3 and less than 40% from the field overall, can't really do anything with the ball, can't really create his own shot. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be all NBA to justify that at $11 million. And obviously he wasn't even close. And if anything, like, he had a very specific niche that he's able to sort of handle. And, we've criticized this in the past, so we don't need to go into too much detail, but it was, signing Gabe Vincent was probably an overreaction to getting torched by Jamal Murray in the playoffs, and sort of ignoring that, like, it doesn't even really matter how positive you think a defender Gabe Vincent is, because if he's on the court, he's immediately going to get switched onto like one screen. And like, especially the way we were playing defense, like one pick, there's a switch, and now Gabe Vincent is guarding someone who's 7 feet tall.
Yep.
That happened every single time he was on the floor, So it's like, if you need somebody to stop Cam Thomas 30 feet away from the basket, sure, I guess Gabe Vincent can fit that. But in 99% of the situations, Kennard is a better fit. So, Kennard, it saves us $500K, which I think gives us flexibility to sign another guy if we waive Maxi. I mean, I would love if somebody could fact check. I'm surprised that none of the Lakers cap guys, and maybe they have addressed this, I've not seen it. But, does that give us enough on its own to just waive Maxi now and sign 2 prorated veteran minimums? That would be another thing to look at as a positive. But just thinking about it in pure basketball, you're swapping expiring for expiring contracts, and you're getting a guy who can actually play. And maybe Kennard is a 9th guy on your bench, but if you put him in the game, he can do something, unlike Gabe Vincent, right? It's not every trade you make has to be for the savior of your season. Sometimes you just need to upgrade deep rotation spots. And I think that that's what they did. All it cost was a 2032 second round pick. Yeah, that's far out. I don't know. Maybe we could have negotiated down to like a pick swap or something, 2032 second round swap. But whatever, you know what I mean? It's like you save the money in the short term, you get Gabe Vincent out of here, you get a fresh look at a new person who's a better roster fit. And I don't really think there's too many negatives. I don't think like win-loss it changes most games, but I don't know. That's also kind of hard to say because it's like Gabe Vincent was such a negative for his minutes. It's like I guess we're about to see how it looks when there's somebody that's even like closer to neutral, right? Because I don't want to undersell how bad Kennard is defensively. He's very bad defensively, but I just think that like the fact that he could give you something offensively is going to be beneficial. And so overall, I like the move.
Yeah, I mean, he's not a good defender, and his stats have dropped off significantly in the playoffs, so that's a different story. But with regards to his regular season play, I I don't know if I'm like too hyped about this, but I think I'm just putting into context who our coach is and the number one thing he values, which is spacing, and the fact that he hasn't actually had this element on this team. He did for like a small portion last season when Dalton Knecht was running hot, but beyond that, he hasn't had his prototypical JJ Redick shooter that he can run legitimate ATO sets for, movement shooter sets for, have him route running and curling off screen. Luke Kennard is that player, you know? And, you know, I just mentioned that he's currently the NBA's leading three-point shooter, but Tommy, did you know that in the modern NBA, Luke Kennard is also the number one three-point shooter in his NBA history, minimum 2,000 attempts when it comes to three-point field goal percentage. Did you know that?
I didn't know that, but it doesn't surprise me that much because he's like career 45% or something absurd
Yes.
like that.
So it's Luke Kennard, 44.2%, Joe Harris, 43.6%, Seth Curry, Kyle Korver, Steve Nash, and look at this bum, Steph Curry at the bottom of the list, 42.2%. But we all know why Steph Curry's there because he also hits shots off the bounce. But that's crazy. Luke Kennard.
Well, can I say one thing about that, though?
Yeah.
I will say to temper expectations on that, Kennard has always historically been like a lower than you would like volume shooter. I think it's probably because he has a pretty slow release. I mean, I think like
we're going to
when
go
you
through
look
his
at
stats. I will show you. That's
when you
not
look
true.
at I will say when you look at him in the when he was in his mid 20s, when he was on the Clippers, he was hitting some years where it was like, okay, this could be a turning point where he just really takes a leap. And I mean, he's always been an elite efficiency shooter. But from what I recall, it's like he just goes through these like long periods where it's like, you know, I feel like for a volume, for a as high of a percentage 3-point shooter that he is, it's like, from what I recall about him, it's a lot of like mid 20s minutes per game, but then like sub 5 attempts from three per game, which it just feel again, it's like if you're shooting 50% from three, it feels like you should be taking more. So I assume there's something going on there, but anyway, you go ahead.
Yeah, I'll dispel that notion in a bit. The only reason why he's like playing 20 minutes per game is, to your point, he's a defensive liability, and his role in the NBA has diminished to the point where that's just who he is, you know? But in his career, this guy has shot, 2022-23 with the Memphis Grizzlies, 5.7 three-point attempts, knocking down 3.1 threes made per game, shooting 54% from three. 3 threes made per game. 2023-24 with the Grizzlies, 2.7 threes made per game, 6.1 three-point attempts, 45% from three. If anything has gone down, it's just his role because he's a defensive liability, and with your minutes going down, so do your reps. But what I'm actually encouraged by with regards to what he did with Atlanta is, and I mentioned this on the live stream that I did earlier, usually with these three-point shooters, if they're a staple part of the rotation and they know they're getting reps and they know their minutes are consistent, it's easy for them to work themselves into a rhythm and be the stable, I'm going to hit 2.5 three-pointers made per game upwards and shoot 40%. We saw this with D'Angelo Russell, right? But then when you turn them into a bench player and they have less reps and they're only coming in for 2 shifts a game, 5 minutes each, usually their percentages drop just because they don't have as many reps. The fact that Luke Kennard can be a 20-minute player coming off the bench these days and lead the league in three-point shooting, to me, that's an encouraging sign because he's shown it on every level of the spectrum. 2.6 threes made per game, 2.7 threes made per game, 3.1 threes made per game on 6 attempts, 5 attempts, 6 attempts. So I don't know if you just forgot who he was in his prime, but obviously these days he's not that because he's only playing like 20 minutes per game. But this dude is like a real shooter, and I would even say you can tack on the volume shooter on top of that as well. So what else do I want to add about Luke Kennard? Yeah, this season with the Atlanta Hawks, 20 minutes, 8 points per game, 2.2 rebounds, 2 assists, 53.8% from the field, 49.7% from three, 91% from the stripe. The one thing that I did want to call out about Luke Kennard that I don't think enough people are talking about is the fact that he can actually handle the ball and he can actually play make a little bit.
Yeah.
And when he was with Detroit, they actually played him as like a backup point guard in certain situations. And so, and if we're comparing him to Gabe Vincent, I would almost say he's a better point guard than Gabe Vincent flat out, because at a certain point, we just had like a 6'2" midget Malik Beasley running around out there, not really doing much for us. So in that respect, and the fact that in comparison to Gabe Vincent, Luke Kennard can actually also get a bucket for himself off his own dribble in the mid-range because he's 6'5", I think it's a plus in like multiple different areas. And I'm not going to oversell his importance, but again, when you put into context the type of team we're trying to be and who JJ Redick is as a coach, we were always supposed to have this Dalton Knecht sort of player. And we were able to live with Dalton Knecht as a defensive sieve last year. What we couldn't live with was Dalton Knecht not doing his one job that he's supposed to do, which is knock down threes and execute these sets. And we've seen so many times, and you've seen it in person, Tommy, where like JJ Redick is banging his head against the clipboard because Dalton Knecht is not in the right spots for a play that was drawn up for him. That's not going to be the case for fellow Dookie Luke Kennard. So I really like the deal. It's a low cost, low risk move, and it helps us in this season and also doesn't hurt us in the summer when we'll talk about all the cap space stuff. But before we talk about like how we feel about the Lakers macro deadline and what they're actually trying to do, we all know what they're trying to do, stopgap year, et cetera, et cetera. I will say, and we were talking about this offline, and we will get to this in more detail as well, but I'm starting to wonder, you know what? Why don't we take it to break here? Because I'm starting to talk about the Lakers deadline as a whole. So let me stop myself. Let's pitch to a couple of sponsors. And when we return, we'll talk about the Lakers deadline as a whole, what they did and didn't do, how we feel about that, and what they could be thinking heading into the buyout market. All right, so we are back. All right, Tommy, we were talking about this offline, but I think first, let's start with our grades for this Lakers trade deadline. Obviously, as someone who makes like trade target videos on the weekly, I have had many ideas over these last 3 months of who the Lakers could target, who I think is possible, et cetera, et cetera. None of them came to pass except for the video that I made 2 days ago when I was like, I think the Lakers need shooting, and they got Luke Kennard. So I've had many possible targets. There were many ways that I felt like the Lakers could go. They didn't end up executing on any of them for a number of different reasons that neither you or I know about. Maybe because the other team just didn't want to trade them to the Lakers. Maybe the Spurs didn't want to trade Jeremy Sohan for Gabe Vincent and felt like he was a better fit for them in the locker room just sitting there. So anyways, I say all that to say, in the vacuum, I probably give the Luke Kennard Gabe Vincent trade like an A- simply because we got rid of Gabe Vincent and got back a productive player. But the ceiling is probably even higher because it's like the exact type of player that JJ Redick needs. And who knows how much that opens up his playbook and whatnot. But I think as a whole, because we weren't able to get rid of Dalton Knecht and Maxi Kleber, or specifically Maxi Kleber, using Dalton Knecht to offload Maxi Kleber and bring back at least another Luke Kennard type player, I would say my overall grade for the Lakers is probably a C+, because it's like we should have gotten something for, if not Maxi Kleber, maybe even Dalton Connect himself. Like, could we have swapped out Dalton Connect for another young flyer? Like, I believe Ochai Agbaji. I don't know what whether Ochai Agbaji cost a second to offload or whether they got a second, but I know the Nets took a flyer on him. Like, could we have taken another flyer on another player using Dalton Connect? And I don't know how far Dalton's value had sunk, and there is a question to be had whether the Lakers picking up his option for next season may have further tanked his value because teams don't want to have his contract on his books. But I have a hard time believing that because it's just $4 million and any team can use spacing. But again, I have no idea what other teams' valuations on Dalton were. Having said that, I think so. In summary, I give the Lakers deadline like a C plus, understanding what they're trying to do in the summer, and it's not just about Giannis. But I will put an asterisk on that C plus and give it a TBD, depending on what happens with the buyout market, because I talked to you offline, but it seems like there were a lot of transactions. There are bloated rosters all over the league. A bunch of teams just have to cut players. And because of that, we may end up seeing a more robust buyout market than usual. And I'm starting to wonder whether the Lakers just withheld from making a consolidation trade for Connect and Kleber because one of their targets may end up finding themselves on the buyout market. So, for example, Haywood Highsmith and Cam Thomas. Cam Thomas got waived, so did Haywood Highsmith. Those were targets that, were being put in trade machines for the Lakers to trade for in general. And so if we reshift, like do a little bit of a paradigm shift, and I had told you before you knew anything, hey, the Lakers came out of this deadline with Luke Kennard, Cam Thomas, and Haywood Highsmith, and they gave up Dalton, Maxi, and Gabe. I think we all would have said, oh, that makes sense. I don't know if we would have been jumping for joy because Haywood Highsmith is injured, but we would have all been like, oh, okay, that makes perfect sense to me. That's a solid trade deadline. Well, we may still end up with those guys depending on how the buyout market shakes out. But as it stands right now, I think I would give it a C plus because I would have expected for them to at least get rid of all the flotsam at the edges of our roster. And, Dalton Connect, we can talk about him later. It is interesting that he's still on this roster. If for nothing else, for the rest of his career, it might be nice for him to learn a thing or two from Luke Kennard. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the Lakers deadline as a whole?
Yeah, I think you're right about needing to wait and see what happens with the waivers. I mean, I think I'm pretty much right there with you in the C plus, maybe B minus range. Maybe the only reason I would angle a little bit higher is the market this year was crazy. It felt like it was very, very much a strong market for sellers. I mean, people were paying a lot. I mean, like you look at Jared McCain. I know pre-injury he was kind of like in the conversation for rookie of the year, but he got moved for several picks that might be pretty good. Dosunmu got moved for uh 4 second round picks. And I know Rob Dillingham has had like a really, really rough start to his career, but they just, I mean, 2 years ago or whatever, a year and a half, I can't remember who was last, 2 years ago, maybe. But
Yeah,
anyway,
2 years.
2 years ago draft, like traded up a first to move up to get him. And then they dumped him with second rounders to get an expiring Dosunmu. So like, Zubats was, I mean, you look at the picks on that Zubats trade, they seem crazy. I mean, Indiana was very aggressive in their pursuit of Zubats. Um, so there's like it was a lot worse this year than I thought. When you were looking at pure salary dumps, which I know you and I were tracking for purposes of Maxi, but like it seemed like, guys were being dumped in the $7 million range who were actually decently productive players like Tyus Jones. And that was costing multiple seconds to dump those contracts for
Yeah.
nothing. And I was like, okay, normally, right, we kind of look at or somewhere in the 6-7 million range is usually like the threshold for 1 second versus 2 seconds to dump that player. Because if you think about it, like I assume that's based in some respects on the fact that teams have $5 million cash to buy picks. So that, and then like they usually spend roughly that amount on second rounders, somewhere between like 3 and 5. So, I don't know how teams are valuing it exactly, but my point is that's like roughly what it costs normally. And So you know, I hope that they looked at something for Maxi. I mean, I think the fact that they pulled off the Gabe in a second for Kennard, which, was on small fan radars. I mean, like you made the video about it, like people were talking about it in fan communities, but it's not like, national media reporters were like, oh, the Lakers are interested in Kennard, so it's like that sort of suggests to me that they really were scouring, like turning over every stone. And so I would assume that means they were strongly looking to try to get something done with Connect and Maxi. My issue is, and you sort of raised this point, I think if I think if we're able to waive Maxi and have enough space to sign two veteran minimum contracts, then maybe we end up in a similar spot, and maybe like factoring that in and knowing, having a sense from maybe agents or whatever, words through the grapevine about who's going to be available in the buyout market. Maybe they were weighing those things against each other, but it does sort of seem like it would have been nice to get rid of two roster spots that were kind of useless, because it's like you could think about, like, okay, maybe I could replace Dalton by, promoting Kobe Buffkin, giving him a non-guaranteed deal for next year. And then it's like you cut your salary that was committed to Dalton for next year, and you also take a flyer on like what seems, in, sort of a short sample size, but seems to be a better prospect than Dalton, in Kobe Buffkin. So it just feels like that would have opened up some more options, because now it's like, okay, we could waive Maxi, but then it's like you only have two spots. So it's like, are you going to sign, like, to, the point you made earlier, it seems like there could be a lot of waiver guys this year. So are you committing yourself to just getting one of those guys, and then one of those guys, like, doing a young player upside sort of pick? Or are you committing yourself to, not doing a young upside pick and just doing two actual vets who are good, who get bought out? I don't, but then that sort of like seems like a waste of time, because we're building for the future, and it would be nice to have Buffkin locked in on like a non-guaranteed small deal for next year. So it's like, it would have been very, very ideal for a number of reasons to try to get Dalton and Maxi out for some sort of 14-15 million dollar salary on a, expiring salary coming back. Um, but I'm sure, all that said, I'm given the trade that they did do, I would be shocked if they didn't try, right? It seems like they really were looking. So I guess we'll just have to see what happens with the waivers.
Yeah, so why don't we talk about some of the waiver guys? So to your point about Kobe Buffkin, I think because the Lakers books are so, like, literally so open this summer, it makes sense to me, because they're not going to rely on Kobe Buffkin in the playoffs. Neither are they going to rely on Drew Timme. So if they open up two roster spots, I would be shocked if they gave it to Nick Smith Jr., Kobe Buffkin, or Drew Timme, even if it means like signing those guys to a cheap veteran minimum deal, non-guaranteed, like they did Jordan Goodwin. They can do that in the summer because they have their restricted free agent rights as a two-way player. So if anything, I think they'll just swap out, one of the current two ways for Kobe Buffkin and kind of do things that way. And if they do waive Maxi Kleber and open up two spots, I think they will try and go for tried and true guys, because we risk having another question mark roster spot if we do that with Kobe Buffkin. Tommy, as good as he's played, I just don't want another, like, I don't know if we can rely on this guy in the playoffs. Like, in theory, he makes sense as a player that is athletic, can play on both ends of the floor, and we'd want to have for the future. But because of the two-way spots, we can kind of have our cake and eat it too, while not putting too much pressure on the dude to be like, hey, by the way, you're going to play in this playoff game. Can you Lonnie Walker this up? I'd rather have a experienced player like Cam Thomas Lonnie Walker it up for us in the playoffs, which is a perfect segue into who are some of the buyout candidates. So right now, from what we know, I don't know if you're looking at this on your phone, Tom. You probably can't even see it, but I have this list up. So Cam Thomas got waived. Haywood Highsmith got waived. Former Laker Lonzo Ball got waived. Mason Plumlee, Andre Drummond might get waived. Currently, I'm not sure if any other names have like officially gotten waived, but we've also started to hear stuff about roster crunches around the league, specifically to Portland. They will need to waive a guy to be able to sign Sidi Sissoko and Caleb Love, who have been staple parts of their rotation and young guys who are part of their future, Portland's going to need to waive some guys. And the guys that I'm thinking of are namely Matisse Thybulle, because he literally hasn't played for them yet. And I guess that's problematic for the rest of this season in terms of whether he can actually play for the Lakers. But who knows if he's just been sitting out longer than expected because he didn't have a role in the rotation anyways, and he was waiting for this moment. But Matisse Thybulle could be a very obvious buyout candidate. Another guy would be Chris Middleton, who got traded to the Mavericks. I don't know what he's doing on the Mavs, and I feel like they would just play Max Christie and PJ Washington more. He seems like an obvious buyout candidate. Some other guys that I sort of have asterisked as guys to monitor would be Isaiah Jackson, who got traded to the Clippers. I guess they could use him, but they also have Yannick Niederhauser and Brooke Lopez, and I actually don't know what the Clippers' intentions are for this season. And Isaiah Jackson just seems like, they could use him, they could not. They could just, jettison him off, and he would be an interesting flyer as another athletic center, because apparently we also need insurance for Jackson Hayes, Tommy, because he's out here tackling mascots and whatnot. So maybe we do need another Jackson Hayes. And then Kevin Love for sort of shits and giggles, like as a spacing big. Obviously, he doesn't help defensively. I doubt the Lakers would prioritize him, but if we want LeBron James to be happy on his way out, here's Kevin Love. And then a name that has always been at the top of mind for me, who has been a free agent since the beginning of the season when the Jazz bought him out, would be KJ Martin, because we could use that infusion of athleticism, speed, explosiveness, a guy who hustles, a guy who rebounds. I've commented before that he reminds me of like a non-shooting, non-playmaking version of Josh Hart. They're the same build. They're strong. They're athletic. And he's a lob threat at the shooting guard small forward position. So these are the names currently swirling around. If I had to pick like Cam Thomas for the talent alone and the fact that he's a huge Lakers and Kobe's fan, Haywood Highsmith, Matisse Thybulle, and KJ Martin would probably be my top picks, although I'm not ruling anything out at this point, obviously. So what are your thoughts on the buyout market, and who's raised your brow more than usual?
So I think we need a point guard. I know Kennard can play it, but I think we need, a backup guard of some sort. Being able to handle the ball is ideal, just for a little bit more depth. Um, and then I would like to get another wing. I did, while you were going over that list, see a tweet that, answered the question I sort of raised earlier, which I think sounds like, I hope this is right. Don't take my don't take my word for it, because I'm operating a motor vehicle while relaying this information. But it seems like if we wait 11 days, then the prorated amount, we could waive Maxi and then just sign two prorated vet min guys. If we wanted to. So I, in terms of who makes sense, Portland is interesting because who are the two guys they're going to waive? They're kind of competing for a play-in spot this year. And given what the Clippers did, and given, what the Mavericks seem like they're doing with the AD trade, it just feels like Portland probably has it, Memphis with the Jaren Jackson Jr. Feels like the teams that were sort of in that range just decided to like bow out for purposes of this year. So it seems like Portland could make it. So are they going to hold on to some vets, younger vets like Robert Williams, Matisse Thybulle? Are they going to cut certain, like, those guys loose? Like, Thybulle's been out the whole year pretty much. I think he's played in like 3 games. What are they going to do? Because, like, as you mentioned, they need a wave too. So sort of depends on who those two guys are that they waive. The Bulls literally have 10 guards, among those Colin Sexton, Anthony Simons. They picked up Dillingham. They picked up Jaden Ivey. I mean, they have other young players. It's like they are presumably going to cut at least one guard, if not multiple. So it seems like on the guard front, we should have some options. I personally, I'm not huge on Cam Thomas, just because I think he wants to go somewhere where he can show that he's the guy, and that's not going to be here for 20 games. And I don't think he would want to come here, honestly, for the same
Mhm.
reasons. I mean, there's like, we can't guarantee him minutes. We can't even guarantee him a rotation spot. I don't think he's interested. And this is not a knock on him, by the way, but like for right now, I would assume he's less interested in playing winning basketball than he is, being able to go out and show what he can do. So maybe some pseudo contender signs him as like a bench spark plug and he could work in other situations, but I don't think it works here. And then, yeah, on the big man front or bigger wing front, I mean, it depends sort of on who gets waived. I think if it ends up being an unexpected like Thibault or something like that, my ideal situation, and this is like crazy to like be banking on, I'm not banking on it, but my ideal situation is we get a wing who is at least somewhat startable, who could play a little bit of defense and maybe guard the point of attack a little bit at least, so that we can move Smart to the bench and have Smart and Kennard be our bench guards, because I feel like those two complement each other
Mm.
pretty well. When we get to the playoffs, Smart's going to be playing close to 30 minutes a game anyway, probably because he's our best perimeter defender. So it doesn't really matter who starts. But yeah, on that front, Thibault is interesting to me if that's who Portland decides they want to waive, because he hasn't been able to stay healthy. And Highsmith, I know that's a name you threw out too. Last year, 100%. This year, I mean, I know we've been like in touch with both guys, or at least agents for both guys. Like Thibault was like on our radar last year and over the summer. For sure that name floated around in connection with the Lakers. And same thing with Highsmith. And so if one, or I mean, Highsmith already got waived, but if we get the option to give one of those guys a 10-day, that would be nice to just sort of see how, if they're healthy and they can play. But yeah, anyway, long story short, I like the options we've given ourselves. To go back to my earlier point, I wish we had three spots, because then we could sign a wing, a big, and a guard. I think we're going to need more than two bigs in the playoffs as just to have as options. And obviously, I don't think Drew Timme is going to be one of those. So it would be nice. But yeah, I don't know. The waivers are so hard because it's like sometimes unexpected things happen, right? Like Klay Thompson could get bought out tomorrow, right? It's like we don't know. Like, although he has multiple years left, it's like stranger things have happened, right? Like maybe Dallas is just like, whatever, as a courtesy to you, we'll cut you loose. You never know, right? And so I'm going to be interested to see what sort of unfolds. But those are the names I'm sort of hoping for, I guess.
And I think because of that reason and because it can be unpredictable, I'm guessing we'll try and stagger this out and not sign two guys outright. We'll sign like our priority target first, whether it's like a Haywood Highsmith or a Matisse Thybulle or even a KJ Martin. And then we'll wait to see the dust settle a little bit. And then by March, when it gets closer to that, you need to sign your guys for the playoffs timeline, maybe we make our second signing and like cut Kleber then when we need to. And then by that point, we'll definitely have enough money under the first apron to comfortably have two new veteran minimum guys. But yeah, I don't know. I think I would have it Haywood Highsmith, Matisse Thybulle, and KJ Martin at the top of my list. It would be nice to, one of my trade targets, like lower lift trade targets, Tommy, was actually trying to get Kevon Looney out of the New Orleans Pelicans because I just wasn't sure what he was doing there. And I was like, I don't know, we could just use a physical rebounder who can eat up space in the paint for like a situational game in the playoffs. But he's still in the Pelicans for some reason. But I don't think he's going to be a buyout guy because he does have like a club option for next year, even though he's essentially expiring. But yeah, I do think, in a perfect world, we get a wing and we get a big. I don't know who those players are going to be. And between Matisse and Haywood Highsmith, I'll pick whoever's the healthiest, and the Lakers will have access to medicals and we'll be able to discern that. I know Haywood Highsmith is like, at least percentage-wise, is a better shooter than Matisse Thybulle. I think volume-wise, they're about the same. So it's really, to me, it boils down to who's healthier out of the two. On paper, Lonzo Ball would probably be great if he wasn't as washed as he's looked this season, because having that connective player on both ends of the floor at his size, I don't know, that sounds like an ideal fit for the Lakers, at least on paper. But again, he might go to Charlotte, and also he's been shooting like 25% from the field in three-point land this season, and we're just not sure whether he has any juice left in his legs. Kind of the same for Chris Middleton, except he's like even older, but he has been productive when he's played. You're just not sure when the wheels are going to fall off. So those are the buyout guys. Tommy, to end this show, let's just really quickly talk about the macro with regards to the Lakers' plans, because I know a lot of fans are disappointed with the outcome of this trade deadline. And I think you are as well. I think you were a little bit more disappointed before our discussion last night, but I guess talk me through your thought process, because I could feel the gears in your head turning once the light bulb went off in my head about what the Lakers are actually trying to do. And I have to credit Pete for this, by the way, because I had always thought about the Lakers absorbing contracts, using their cap space to absorb contracts. But Pete, for the first time, got it into my head that the Lakers may actually not only be absorbing bad contracts, but because of the landscape of the NBA with this apron world, so many teams are starting to so many teams need to offload actual productive players. And some of these productive players that they need to offload could actually be good Luka fits on the next iteration of this Lakers team. So I think we all just saw in this trade deadline how hard it is to even move off of expiring contracts when you don't have tertiary assets at your disposal. We literally had 1 second-round pick, 30-second second-round pick. The fact that we were able to trade an unproductive player for a player who's still playing is a miracle in and of itself. But I think this just reminded me, like, even when it comes to having multiple seconds, we need to have those in our coffers. That's how we got DFS last season. D'Angelo Russell in 3 seconds. That's how we got Rui Hachimura 2 or 3 years ago. Kendrick Nunn, 3 seconds. But when you're out all of these second-round picks, we're not even talking about first-round picks, which the Lakers are also out of, but at least they have 1 2031, and they have all their pick swaps, which are 5. But clearly no other team traded pick swaps, so that wasn't a thing this season. But I think the dearth of assets that we have and the cap space plan that people have been talking about, I think the Giannis stuff is just smoke and mirrors. Yes, we will put our best foot forward with regards to chasing Giannis, but anybody whose objective will be like, I have no idea why the Bucks would accept this deal unless Giannis was like, I'm going to the Lakers no matter what. But barring that, I think that's more for the casual fan sell. Like, oh, the Lakers are star chasers, so obviously they'll go for Giannis. But I think the real plan here is to restock our asset coffers, Tommy. And that means using our cap space to absorb contracts, but not just absorb contracts in the way that we've thought about in the past, where it's like usually that term is used for, oh, we got to pick up, like who's a bad example or a good example of this? Like, we got to get 3 more years of KCP at $24 million. And yes, okay, you'll give us a late first round pick, but we'll do it. No, these days you're getting MPJ and a 30-second first round pick unprotected, like a literal like starter level fringe all-star player. I'm not saying that like those players are gonna come out of the woodwork this summer, but if you're just tracking like the luxury tax bills of some of these teams and the repeater tax, like Tommy, for example, everybody wanted Andrew Wiggins to some extent, right? But it seemed like the cost for Andrew Wiggins was a 2031 first round pick. What if I told you that we could wait just 6 months from now, and instead of us giving the Miami Heat a first round pick, they give us, maybe they don't give us a first round pick, but they give us 2 seconds to offload Andrew Wiggins because Andrew Wiggins unexpectedly, or maybe not unexpectedly, but because Andrew Wiggins opted into his $30 million player option, and Miami would rather have that space to chase after Giannis. And so they're like, hey, Lakers, take on Andrew Wiggins for free. You don't have to give us a first. And in fact, we'll give you 2 seconds to do it. And in that scenario, all we did was wait a few more months. We got Andrew Wiggins, still have our first round pick, and restocked our coffers. Maybe it's not even the 2 seconds. Maybe we get Jaime Jaquez attached to him, So I think when I started thinking about things in that respect, and it remains to be seen whether Rob Pelinka is creative enough to do this, but in my head, I feel like Mark Walter will have cleaned house by this summer and positioned a new GM there to have everything at his disposal, the wide open blueprint. And so from that respect, I think it made sense to me for them to wait and not use that 2031st on an Andrew Wiggins or even a Jarrett Allen, who same situation applies. 6 months from now, Cleveland may have totally different plans in mind. And they're like, okay, LeBron's coming. There's another target. Yes, we got below the second apron, but we can get even further below. Can we pawn Jarrett Allen off? Because Jarrett Allen is an example of a good player, but on a pretty bad contract. He's on for like 28 to 30 million over the next 3 years. That's a player who we could get for free, Tommy, by just absorbing him into our cap space. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Cavs are also like, and here's 3 seconds for your troubles, because the Lakers are set to be one of like 3 teams with a large amount of cap space this summer. And so when I started to think about things that way, I think I always understood the stopgap thing, but now I'm kind of like, oh, I see the vision if it can be executed correctly. So tell me your thought process.
So I was annoyed about the possibility of not using the 2031 first at first. Not for the reasons you just raised, but mostly because I I guess like the reason that I ended up not being annoyed that we didn't use it um is not because of like, oh well, and just wait a few months and then these we might have these new possibilities. It was more when you look at the trades that happened, there was nothing in there. I mean, like there no players moved where it's like, oh, that went for one first. Why didn't we do that? Like usually that's what happens, right? It's like transaction cycle ends and it's like, okay, are we serious? Like this guy moved for like 2 seconds and Rob just like, were we not looking at this guy? You know what I mean? Like there was nothing like that where a guy moved and I'm like, yeah, we should have done that for one first. It did seem like everybody was holding really, really ridiculously high prices on their assets this year. And so I think that's like a big reason why we saw some of these, like the few things that did happen, it seemed like they were like kind of overpays, even like the names that were floating around for a long time. I don't know. Anyway, it felt like there was a lot of overpays this year. And so if you don't want to use the 2031 first because of the overpays, that's fine. My thing about the cap space plan is I'm just gonna like just using that example, right? It's like it all sounds nice in theory, but I'll just use your Heat example because that was the last one. Okay, so like we get to the summer, there becomes a sequencing issue that I think, is going to sound familiar to a lot of people because it's like once you actually get into this stuff, the timing ends up being a problem, and then you pretty much just end up in a situation where you're screwed because you just have to re-sign your own guys, right? And so let me explain. Like one way that this could go down using that Heat example is summer starts, Ayton opts in, Marcus Smart opts in. You weren't able to move Dalton. Now that 55 million looks closer to 40. You do a Wiggins and Jaime Jaquez dump and you accept that as like, to take a flyer on Jaquez. You've now burned through all of your open cap space, right? And then you're back in the position of like, okay, I guess we just have to re-sign our guys. So in this scenario, you I don't know, is it like an upgrade? Maybe, but I don't know, maybe you lost Rui to get that done. And you replaced him with Wiggins and Jaquez. Maybe that's okay. Maybe it didn't cost you an asset. Maybe you were kind of thinking about doing that now. Um, but I think, what ends up happening in these situations is you are not these teams are not like tied to their luxury tax bill until the end of the season. And so I don't think that teams in July, I mean, some teams will, right? Because there's a lot of tanking teams out there. But I don't know that it's necessarily the case in July that teams are going to be like, okay, I have to desperately dump $30 million of salary today. The Cavaliers may make the finals. It's a wide open East, and they just got James Harden. If that's the case, I think they'll probably justify paying some luxury tax next year, right? It's like, and I think they did get pretty close to the second apron line if they didn't get below it. So it'll be easier for them to get below it already this summer without having to dump a $30 million contract. You have teams that are just going to think about like potentially waiving and stretching guys instead of dumping them for nothing. The guys who are guys that we would want. By the way, a lot of these contracts that are teams are going to be trying to dump. It's not going to be like 1 year deals. It's going to be multi-year deals, and for assets that are not necessarily going to be easy to reflip. And then it's like you're committed now to this guy. So I I just think that there's like a sequencing issue where it's like the summer is going to start, free agency is going to start, and teams' first moves are not going to be, I need to shed $30 million for luxury tax reasons. I think they're going to sign who they need to sign using the various exceptions or whatever is available to them, and then think about that later in the summer. And by then, it's like, what are you going to do? Hold your cap space until August? Because it's like the teams that pick up guys like for the taxpayer mid level. And then now it's like, okay, I picked up a center for the taxpayer mid level, so I don't need Jared Allen anymore. I don't know that it's going to be the case that they're going to be so desperate that they need they need to just dump him at that moment for nothing, right? And so I think that the what's going to end up happening is like, unless we use our cap space before free agency starts, we're going to be in a situation where free agency is going to start and we're just going to have to use our cap space to either sign our own guys or sign free agents, or else we're going to miss out on that transaction cycle too. I just don't see there like, sorry, it could happen, but I don't think it's like, oh, it's just a given that we're going to enter this like pre-draft or like, that draft to free agency transaction cycle where there's going to be all these teams looking to dump players. I mean, even the Michael Porter Jr., like, yeah, they paid a first and, and they downgraded, but it was a first with it to downgrade and save some money. It wasn't just to lose them for nothing. Right. And so I just feel like those situations for actually desirable players who fit and are healthy, because again, it's like the guys that when these teams that have overcommitted on contracts are looking up and down their roster and trying to figure out who they're going to dump, it's going to be like the guys who haven't been able to stay healthy or the guys who I'm paying you like DeAndre Hunter, you're making $25 million, but you're really more like a $15 million player. Like it's going to be stuff like that. And then it's like, was that worth it it's like we could say a few months, but it's like in a way throwing away the season. And so again, I am overstating throwing away the season because given the trades that happened, I don't think there was anything out there that we could have spent our 2031 first on and gotten something done. So it doesn't really matter. It sort of ended up being what it is, but I'm not terribly optimistic about how that space is going to be used because, factors change and all of a sudden it's like, you don't have that as much space as you thought. And so anyway, that's sort of all my thoughts on the free agency plan. It's like there are some, I think Quentin Grimes is a sort of interesting unrestricted free agent, but you know, Phil, Philly did some things to like clear some space, so maybe they are gonna just keep him. Like, I just don't know that. Like, yeah, I know we're in the second apron world or whatever, but I think there are only a few teams. Like, there aren't that many teams operating too high over the aprons anymore, and too many teams who are going to be super, super crunched in that way. And of course, all this can change, but that's sort of what it seems like right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair, and it is important to take into account who we would be swapping out, like accounting for Rui eventually. But I don't think that's a problem because you don't renounce your players until you desperately need to. And I know Rui can get a market, but there's a sequencing problem in general because the NBA is going to be beholden to whatever happens with this Giannis deal. And I agree. I don't think it's a given that the Lakers will be able to use their cap space effectively, but it's an angle that I don't think enough people are talking about. It's a versatility that we access that not enough fans are talking about because these teams will be pinched and it will get to a point where they will have to dump people for nothing. For example, the Denver Nuggets, if they want to re-sign Peyton Watson, they will have to dump Cam Johnson for nearly nothing. And the Lakers are an open book. And to me, this is not like they're giving away their season. They're building the blocks to make their eventual trade because we do still need, salary ballast to flip out, while also it would be helpful if that salary ballast also fit, which, a guy like Cam Johnson would if he's healthy. And then to me, the biggest thing is just we need to restock our asset base because we can't do anything if we don't like refertilize our asset soil. You know what I'm saying? And the best way to do that, and I don't know if they're going to do this, but if we had a smart GM, I believe this is the way to take advantage of. There are going to be specific situations, and I know it's not going to be widespread, but you look at Orlando, you look at Cleveland, you look at OKC, these apron teams, in order for them to facilitate deals, and there will be deals this summer, we're all going to be waiting on pins and needles for the Giannis thing to unfold. And the Lakers will obviously get in there themselves, but they could also act as a third-party facilitator because they are one of the teams who have, and it's not, the craziest thing is, again, we are one of 3 teams who can facilitate these types of deals for other teams. It's not just about them getting out of the luxury tax. If another team wants to even make a trade, if they are like a second apron team or whatever, they have to aggregate salary dollar for dollar, you know? And for you to be the team that actually has the requisite amount of space to be able to, again, this is not a given. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it gives you a versatility to be like, hey, I can charge you extra to help you facilitate this deal and give me that player, that productive player. I think that is a value, and I think it's a value that's not being stated enough because people are focused on, oh my gosh, what are you going to do? You're going to try and Quentin Grimes, who's going to stick with the Sixers? Like, no, if that's actually the Lakers' plan, then we're all doomed already, you know? Like, but I actually think it's this other thing that nobody is talking about because people just think that we're in the age of like, yeah, just salary dump Kwame Brown to us and we'll give you picks or whatever. You saw it in this transaction cycle alone, like, Jaren Jackson Jr. went to the Jazz and the Grizzlies got a whole bunch of picks for doing that. Granted, they were 2 lower level picks and like a future first, but they also got former lotto picks just to, you know, get off of, am I saying this correctly? Maybe it's the opposite way around.
No, you're flipping
I'm
this
flipping
example.
this example.
Yeah. But
anyways,
I understand the point you're trying to make, right? But the thing is, we're dealing with Luka Doncic in his like in the middle of his prime right now, right? And certainly he's having an MVP caliber year, right? And it's like our biggest complaint this year is like you look at our roster, you get 15 spots between Maxi Kleber, Gabe Vincent, Bronny James, and Dalton Connect. And by the way, we've only had 14 available spots because we're hard capped, right? So out of 14 guys, those 4 have been just useless in every way,
yeah.
frankly, because it's not even like in the case of Bronny and Dalton, like, okay, well, those guys are next year contributors. Absolutely no indication that either of those guys can be even 11th or 12th guys next year. Like Bronny is getting better, but I like, again, he's not really there. I mean, Dalton is like regressing if anything. And so it's like, those are the types of guys you're going to get, right? It's like it's this type of plan sounds appealing when the names are Cam Johnson, Michael Porter Jr., whoever Orlando has to dump. But when the names are Colin Sexton, Anthony Simons, it just like, would those types of players help if you're getting some seconds back? Yeah, but if those weren't the guy, like how many seconds would you have to, like, would you be willing to give up to like open up the roster spot to get a better fit, right? It ends up sort of becoming circular in some ways to me. And so that's why I'm like, I'm trying to be optimistic about like what the options are going to look like. And I think optionality is great. I just I don't know that it's going to work out that way because of the timing. Like we have to go into the draft. We
Well,
have to make a draft pick. I can't remember, by the way, if like this 55 million assumes we keep our pick. But you know, we have
it
to make a
does.
draft pick and then it's like free agency is like a week later, right? It's like a lot of teams are just going to be like, it's not like Cleveland can dump Jared Allen and then go sign a $30 million player. They're already going to be over the salary cap, right? So if they have a tax reason to want to do that, maybe, but again, they might be competitive for a championship this year. If they wanted to do that, they don't owe their tax bill until the end of next season. So they could wait till the deadline and dump it on somebody, you know, try to get something done to get below the cap at the deadline. It's not just going to be like one transaction cycle that the teams are looking to just like, I need to offload $40 million tonight, right?
Yeah, I think we're essentially both getting to the same place, but in different respects. Because I think to your point earlier, like, I think we both agree, like, especially if we're going to flip the front office, you want that new GM to just have, and it's like such an opportune moment to start from scratch. And you want that person to have all of the assets at their disposal, the 2026 first, the 2031 or 2032, 2033, all the pick swaps versus muddling the water a little bit for a flyer on, I guess we could have gotten Eves Missy, right? Who's a player that I really like for a first round pick. But what if he doesn't pan out and he is raw and all of a sudden, like I'm just giving up scenarios of like, instead of what if we do have, I'm not using Giannis as like an option, but like, what if Giannis is an option? Or like, I think I think we're getting to the same spot of like this trade deadline, while sobering, you understand why it had to be done because the Lakers are in a bad position kind of regardless. And at least for me, I would rather wait a couple of months. And it's not like we're giving up on this season. I mean, we're like, yes, we're in sixth place, but we're also 3 games out of second. You know what I mean? Like that's how it's going to be till the end of the season. And if we can really hit our stride or whatever, and who knows what happens, maybe we make it out of the first round. All that to say is we were not going to become a championship contending team with that one first pick regardless, which is what I think you were getting at. And so in light of that, right, I would rather wait, see if Mark Walter, cleans house, which everybody's hoping he does, and then give that GM a chance to succeed with all the assets at his disposal, whether it's using that cap space to re-sign our own guys but having all of our picks, or using that cap space to absorb one big contract, re-signing everybody else, restocking our coffers, and then making a trade later. It just seems to me the most healthiest of a bad situation for it to pan out this way.
Yeah.
Any last words?
I think the answer is, right, and we're probably aligned on this. It doesn't, in some ways, it doesn't matter how we ended up here. This is how we ended up here. And I don't think there was a path to not end up here, really. Like, I think we could have dangled out that 2031 first to anybody, and there was nobody that any fans certainly would have wanted. The names that were moving around for the prices that were paid were insane, in my opinion, this year. I keep going back to Dosunmu, but like, I know that guy is really good and I would have loved to have him. It cost 4 second rounders and Rob Dillingham to get him. And Rob Dillingham's on a rookie contract. I know it's a lotto pick contract, but like they could just not pick up his option. I mean, it's not like you're committed long term to some guy like a 6'2" guard making 20 million a year. They could easily get out of that in like relatively near term. So like the prices were crazy. We ended up in this situation anyway. I caution about the future, but I also, to the last point you were talking about, getting a fresh start, it would not surprise me one bit if Rob was fired the day the season ended. I think like everybody, and not by the way, because of anything that he did this year or whatever. I just think that like you look at what Jeannie did on the way out, all of the execs that she was close to, like the Ramby and some other name, like the old CFO that was close to her. All those people got like, sweetheart payments sort of on her way out. The Ramby combined picked up 32 million, you know what I mean? And in payments to leave at the end. I think in the case of Rob Pelinka and JJ Redick, because Jeannie had committed to them before selling the team, those quote unquote commitments came in the form of salary, contract extensions. And so, that was clearly approved by Walter, but Rob got an extension right before this season when it was known that Walter was going to be the new owner. And so like that doesn't suggest to me that Walter has loyalty to Rob. It just suggests to me that was something that was important to Jeannie. And so it wouldn't surprise me that much if she just fired him. And so I think like it's very possible we go into the 2026 draft with a new GM making his first pick, which is going to be in the first round, and then 2 first round picks and a ton of cap space to sort of relatively open, clean books to go figure something out for the future. I It would not surprise me at all if that was sort of the plan, or if that wasn't the plan, if that's where it ends up anyway, just because of how things happen to turn out with this transaction cycle, with everyone being like so expensive. I mean, the names that we have heard for months, and I mean, the Pelicans didn't trade anyone except Alvarado, with all those assets they have, like, burning space on their roster. The Kings didn't trade anybody. The Grizzlies didn't trade John Morant. I mean, there are just so many teams that didn't do anything. And so I think it's just because, the prices were mismatched between buyers and sellers, and it was a weird year. And the draft is supposed to be stacked. So it doesn't really matter. This is where we ended up. But I think that the side benefit is whether or not it's Rob, either way, you can move with a new guy and you give him clear books, or you can continue with Rob and see how it goes. But we have optionality, and we sort of fell backwards into it, but it's not a bad thing to have.
And to your point about that last thing, like, I'm not saying this is happening behind the scenes, but if you're Mark Walter, do you really trust Rob Pelinka to do right with your 2031 first or 2032 first in this trade deadline to make the right move when last season he traded for Mark Williams and then on top of it added a pick swap? And then you're going to fire him and then you're going to give your new GM this, like, you've got one first to work with. Good luck. In my sense, in my head, it makes more sense to keep Rob Pelinka where he is as almost a lame duck. Let him be the fall guy. If he somehow like falls ass backwards into like a contending season, whatever, you can evaluate things then. But to me, it makes more sense. Like, again, I'm not saying this is happening behind the scenes, but to me, it makes sense for Mark Walter to be like, hey, don't make a move with that first unless you really think it's worth it, because we want to be stacked with all these. And maybe he's even using Giannis as an excuse to be like, no, we're going after Giannis, Rob. Like, this is what's the fan fiction going on in my head, right? But to me, it makes sense that you want to set your future GM up for actual success, and taking that first away from Rob Pelinka's hands right now before he can muddle up the situation. And all of a sudden we are stuck with Jarrett Allen, Tommy, for 3 years. And we've used that first and we're like, well, shit, what do we do now? Yeah. So anyways, that'll do it for this episode. Tommy, welcome back, and see you later forever. Goodbye. Maybe we'll have you back soon again in the future. But, yeah, like this video, comment down below, please hit subscribe, consider becoming a member to the Lakers Legacy YouTube channel. And with that said, Tommy, I will catch you later.